It happened a few months ago. I've been driving for Lyft for a few years now, mostly sticking to late night shifts. I prefer the quiet roads, the emptiness of the streets, and the fact that tips tend to be better in the middle of the night. But as you can imagine, there's a trade-off. Sometimes, the things you encounter on these late night shifts are off. And the ride I'm about to tell you about? Well, it was nothing short of bizarre and terrifying. I've always prided myself on being careful, vigilant even. You get a feel for things after a while, especially driving in the dead of night. The late night crowd is usually predictable drunks, the occasional quiet passenger, or even some lost tourist who doesn't know their way around the city. But every once in a while, you get someone who stands out in the worst way. That's exactly what happened that night. It started off normal enough. My beat-up 2005 Volvo was humming along the empty streets as I rolled into a convenience store for a pickup. Nothing seemed amiss at first, but then my gut started to tighten. You ever get that feeling when you just know something's off, even though you can't quite put your finger on it? That's exactly what hit me as I pulled up. The store was closed. All the lights were off, and the parking lot was empty. The neon sign flickered, casting a dim glow onto the dark, silent street. I slowed down as I neared the curb, unsure of what was going on. The only sign of life was the man pacing outside the store. He was dressed in a ragged hoodie, worn thin with age, and it looked like it hadn't seen a washing machine in years. He kept glancing over his shoulder, his movements jerky, almost as if he were paranoid. Something felt off. The guy wasn't even standing still, just pacing like he was waiting for something or someone. I hovered my finger over the cancel button on my phone, but for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I unlocked the door and waited. And then, he slid into the back seat without a word. The moment he settled into the seat, I regretted not canceling the ride. His eyes were fixed on me, not blinking, not looking away, just staring. It was the kind of stare that made your skin crawl. He wasn't aggressive or overtly strange at first, but something about the way he looked at me made me feel uncomfortable. I tried to brush it off and focused on driving. The car was silent except for the occasional hum of the engine. Most passengers either stare out the window or check their phones. But not him. He just sat there, his eyes locked onto me in the rearview mirror. It was unnerving, and I tried not to look back, but the pull of his gaze was magnetic. Trying to break the silence, I turned on the radio, hoping the music would fill the awkward void. But the moment the station came on, his voice interrupted me with a sharp command, "Turn it off." I jumped at the suddenness of it. His voice was deep, raspy, and unmistakably gravelly, as if he smoked a pack a day, every day. It caught me off guard, and I jerked the steering wheel a little, but I quickly apologized and turned the music off. Now, I'm used to strange passengers, but this guy was different. There was a tension in the air, a certain hostility. The ride continued in silence for a while, and all I could do was focus on the road ahead, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. But then, out of nowhere, he spoke again. His words caught me completely off guard. "Have you ever picked up someone you shouldn't have?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. It was a strange question, and the way he asked it sent a chill down my spine. I tried to brush it off with a light laugh, saying, "Well, I hope not." But there was no response. Just the eerie silence in the car. He leaned back, and I noticed he was smiling, not the usual smile, but the kind that seemed off. Like it didn't belong. He continued talking about how he used to be an Uber driver but quit because some punk stole stuff from his car. As he rambled, he smiled the entire time. And that's when I realized his smile never wavered. It was unsettling. He finished the story with a chilling comment, "It's funny how much trust you put in someone sitting right behind you." That's when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't figure out whether he was just some guy on drugs or if there was something more sinister behind his words. The way he said it felt like a threat, even though he didn't outright say anything menacing. The silence in the car felt heavier with each passing second. The air felt thick, like a storm was about to hit. I tried to keep my composure and focused on the road. We were just a few minutes from his destination when suddenly he snapped out of his daze. "Hey, you missed the turn," he yelled abruptly. The GPS clearly showed we were on track, but I slammed the brakes anyway out of sheer instinct. He demanded I pull over, and despite every warning bell going off in my head, I did as he asked. My heart was pounding in my chest. I had no idea what was going on, but everything in me screamed that I was in danger. The next few moments happened in a blur. That's when everything took a turn for the worse. Headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. A police car. I sighed in relief for just a moment, thinking maybe I'd get some help. But then something strange happened. The man in the back seat slouched down like he was trying to hide. He remained completely still, almost as if he didn't want the cops to see him. I turned my head, trying not to make it obvious that I had noticed his movements. I kept my breathing steady, keeping my eyes on the road, but my pulse was racing. I looked back into the rearview mirror just in time to see the cop car slowly roll past us. The cop didn't even stop, didn't even give us a second glance. The guy finally sat up again, looking at me with an odd, almost smug expression. "You got lucky," he muttered as he opened the door. I didn't say a word. I just stared as he exited the car, leaving me to sit there, frozen in place. That was the end of the ride. I didn't wait around to see where he went. I called it a night right then and there. I drove home, but the unsettling feeling stayed with me. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure: I'd never pick up a ride like that again. The encounter with the strange passenger stayed in my mind long after I dropped him off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly avoided something worse, but there was a sense of unease that lingered, gnawing at the back of my mind. I tried to push it aside, but something about that night just didn't sit right. A few days later, I was driving again, trying to put the odd ride behind me. It was just another regular shift, and I figured I could get through it without thinking about the weird guy in the back seat. But life has a funny way of proving us wrong when we get too comfortable. I had just dropped off a group of friends from a night out, and the streets were as quiet as they had been on the night of that unsettling ride. I was on a back street when my phone rang. It was an unknown number again. My gut immediately tensed. I couldn't help but think of that guy. I brushed it off and let the call go to voicemail, half expecting it to be another scam. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, I answered it immediately, expecting the same old sales pitch. But what I heard was nothing like that. "Did you think you were safe?" The voice on the other end was gravelly, deep, and unmistakable. My breath caught in my throat, and I nearly swerved off the road. I knew that voice. It was him, the man from the convenience store. My heart started racing, and I had to grip the steering wheel to keep my hands from shaking. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could feel the cold sweat running down my spine. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice coming out hoarse. The voice on the other end let out a slow chuckle, and then he spoke again. "You don't know me, but I know you," he said, his voice low and almost taunting. He paused for a moment, and I could hear the sound of static in the background. The noise was almost comforting compared to the tension that was building in my chest. "I remember your car. I remember your face. You should have let me in the car, but you didn't. Big mistake." A shiver ran down my spine as he continued, each word making me feel more trapped. "You thought it was just a random pickup, didn't you?" His voice dropped lower. "I can follow you anytime I want. You won't know when I'll be watching, but I'll be there." I could feel my throat closing up, and I was at a loss for words. I had to get off the phone, but my body felt paralyzed with fear. My thumb hovered over the screen, and I wanted to hang up, but I couldn't tear myself away. The silence on the other end felt oppressive, thick with menace. Finally, I managed to find my voice. "What do you want?" The response came quickly, his voice sharp like a knife. "I want to see if you'll make the same mistake twice." Then, without warning, the line went dead. My heart was pounding in my chest as I stared at my phone, the cold sweat clinging to my skin. I had never been so shaken in my life. The car seemed to be moving of its own accord as I turned off the main road and onto a quieter street. I needed to pull myself together. But it was like I couldn't escape the tension that had filled the air. It wasn't until I parked on the side of the road, my hands still trembling, that I realized I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit back and ignore this. The thought of him following me again, of him knowing where I was, made my skin crawl. I quickly pulled up the details of my last ride on the app, but everything appeared normal. No red flags, no information that stood out, except for the fact that this guy had been so calm, so methodical during the entire interaction. He knew exactly how to make me uncomfortable without even having to try. It was almost as if he was testing me, seeing just how far he could push before I would react. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to tell the police, but I hesitated. How could I explain that I was being harassed by someone I barely knew, a passenger who had only been in my car for a few minutes? There wasn't any physical evidence, no real threat, just a voice on the phone and a feeling in my gut telling me something was off. A few minutes passed before I decided I'd had enough. I wasn't going to be scared off by some random person. I started the engine and drove home, the whole time looking over my shoulder, convinced I was being followed. But when I finally pulled into my driveway, I breathed a sigh of relief. The street was quiet, and I didn't see anything unusual. I locked my doors and went inside, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. But that night, sleep didn't come easily. My mind kept racing, thinking about what he had said, about how he seemed to know everything about me. The next few days were a blur. I kept expecting another phone call, but it never came. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, waiting, watching. But just as suddenly as he had appeared, the fear seemed to fade. I thought maybe I had just been overreacting to a prank. After all, what were the chances that the same guy would come back? But then, a week later, as I was heading out for another night shift, I received another strange call. This time, I didn't even need to answer to know who it was. It was him again. The fear I felt then, the panic that flooded my chest, was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. I knew that I wasn't just dealing with some random stranger, I was dealing with someone who knew how to toy with people's emotions, who knew how to get under your skin and leave you questioning everything. And so began the next chapter in my nightmare. The phone calls, the constant fear, and the feeling that I wasn't alone even when I was. The phone calls didn't stop after that first night. If anything, they became more frequent, more unsettling, and more specific. At first, I thought it was just the same weird guy, getting a sick thrill out of messing with me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that these calls weren't just some random prank. Something was off. Deeply off. For the next few days, I tried to go about my life as normally as possible. I kept myself busy with driving for Lyft and avoided checking my phone too often. But it was always there, this lingering fear that if I answered the phone, it would be him again. I didn't tell anyone about the calls. Not my friends, not my family, not even my fellow Lyft drivers. It felt like I was losing control over the situation, like the more I tried to ignore it, the more it consumed me. But there was no avoiding it. It wasn't just the calls anymore. One night, a few days after the second phone call, I was sitting in my car, parked in front of a convenience store, my usual pickup spot. It was just after midnight, the roads were as quiet as ever, and I was trying to shake the feeling of dread that had been hanging over me since the first call. I took a deep breath, checked my phone for any updates on the ride, and then pocketed it. Then, the phone rang again. It was the same unknown number. I froze. This time, I didn't hesitate. I immediately answered it, my heart racing. "Hello," I said, trying to sound calm, though my voice cracked under the pressure. "You're still there, aren't you?" The voice was unmistakable. It was the same deep, gravelly voice I had heard before, but this time, it was even lower, slower, more deliberate. He didn't even bother with pleasantries this time. "I told you, I don't know who you are, and I'm not playing your games," I snapped, my heart pounding as I tried to steady my breathing. "Stop calling me." He chuckled, a slow, mocking laugh that sent a chill through me. "You don't understand, do you?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're the one who's been following me." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. "I'm not stupid," he continued. "I know exactly what you've been doing. I've seen you. I've seen you everywhere." My mind started to race. He was saying things that made no sense, yet somehow felt eerily specific. "You've seen me." I stammered, still unable to process his words. "Yeah," he replied, his tone unnervingly calm. "I know where you go. Where you stop. I know what time you're driving, what time you get off. I see everything." My mind flashed back to that night he had gotten into my car, how he had sat there, staring at me without blinking, making me feel like I was under some kind of surveillance. It was like everything he said now made sense, but it made it all the more terrifying. "Stop it," I pleaded, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is insane. You're crazy. I'm going to the police if you don't stop calling me." He laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. "Oh, I've already been to the police. Don't you remember what I told you? I'm always right behind you. You've been running from me since the first time we spoke." I immediately hung up, my heart racing in my chest. This couldn't be happening. I couldn't breathe. I sat there in silence for what felt like forever, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. I was so scared to look around, to see if he was out there somewhere watching me. But I had to move. I couldn't just stay there in the parking lot forever. I turned the car on and drove away, trying to keep my eyes on the road as I checked every rearview mirror and every side street. The fear was consuming me, but I had to keep driving. It was about 30 minutes into my drive, my hands still trembling from the call, when something happened that nearly made me lose control of the car. A car pulled up beside me, matching my speed, then staying just a little too close. I glanced over, and for a split second, my heart nearly stopped. It was the same car. The same dark sedan I had seen a few days ago. I didn't know how he had followed me, but there was no mistaking it. I could feel the blood drain from my face as I sped up, hoping that he would back off. But he didn't. He stayed right beside me, matching my every move. I turned down a side street, hoping he would be too slow to follow, but the sedan mirrored my turn. My heart was hammering in my chest as I realized that he was tracking my every move. I did the only thing I could think of. I floored it, racing down unfamiliar streets, praying that I could lose him. But no matter how fast I drove, the sedan kept pace. It was almost as if he knew the roads better than I did, as if he was leading me on some twisted chase. Eventually, I made another sharp turn and pulled into the first place I could find, an empty parking lot with streetlights flickering in the distance. I slammed on the brakes, threw the car into park, and sat there, holding my breath. I watched the sedan pull in after me, its headlights blinding me as it slowed to a stop just a few feet away. For a moment, everything was silent. I didn't know what he wanted, what he planned to do. My heart pounded in my ears as I waited for him to make a move. But he didn't. After what felt like an eternity, the sedan slowly turned around and drove off. I stayed in the parking lot, frozen, unable to move for several minutes. My mind was racing. What just happened? Was it him? I finally called the police. I had no idea what else to do. When they arrived, they found nothing. The sedan was long gone. They asked if I was sure, if I had seen the car clearly. But I had. I knew I had. And as much as I wanted to just go home, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching me. That night, I went home, but I didn't sleep. The thought of what had just happened, the reality of the situation, had me on edge. The man, the voice on the phone, the car that had followed me, it all felt like a nightmare I couldn't escape. And the worst part was, I knew that wasn't the end of it. It was only just beginning. The phone calls didn't stop. In fact, they escalated. Each call was more disturbing than the last. The man seemed to know more and more about me every time he spoke. The first few times, he'd simply recite details about my daily routine, things I thought were harmless, like the times I typically left my apartment or how often I worked my late-night shifts. But as the days passed, he started to get more specific, more unsettling. It was like he had been watching me for a while, learning my habits, figuring out my schedule. One evening, just as I was getting into my car after a shift, my phone rang again. The number was unfamiliar, the same as before, but I answered it with a deep breath, prepared for whatever was to come. "You looked nice tonight," the man's voice said, low and cold, sending a chill straight through me. I froze. I had just finished my shift at the bar. I hadn't seen anyone. No one had approached me. The parking lot was empty except for my car. How did he know I had just left work? "Who is this?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best effort to stay calm. He didn't respond right away. Instead, I heard soft shuffling, like he was moving around, pacing. When he finally spoke again, it was even more chilling than before. "You really shouldn't be driving around alone so late. Someone could follow you," he said, his voice almost playful, but there was an undeniable edge of danger beneath it. The blood drained from my face. Was he following me right now? I scanned the empty lot, my eyes darting around, looking for any sign of movement, any sign that I wasn't alone. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples as the man continued, "You see, I've been watching you for a while now. Your car. Your schedule. Your every move." I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't know what to do. I should have been rational, hung up, called the police, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. "You think you're safe?" he asked, his voice lowering to a whisper. "You've been driving home alone for weeks. Do you ever wonder what could happen if you weren't so careful?" I was about to tell him to stop, to hang up, but then my heart nearly stopped. From the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of something movement. A figure emerged from the shadows at the edge of the parking lot. I couldn't make out who it was, but I could feel it was him. My body went cold. The man on the phone noticed my hesitation and chuckled darkly. "I see you saw him. He's watching you, too. But don't worry, I'm not going to let anything happen to you yet." I didn't wait another second. My finger slammed down on the end call button as I frantically started my car, my mind racing with fear and adrenaline. I looked in the rearview mirror as I backed out of the spot, but there was nothing behind me, nothing except the empty darkness. I didn't care if I was being paranoid. My instincts screamed at me to get out of there. As I drove away, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see headlights following me. Every turn, every street light that passed, felt like a potential trap. It wasn't until I made several random turns, trying to lose anyone who might be following me, that I realized I was completely alone. There was no car behind me. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. I didn't know who this man was or why he was fixated on me, but I knew that I wasn't safe. When I arrived home, I did the one thing I had avoided: I called the police. I explained the situation, told them everything: the calls, the man's behavior, how he knew personal details about my life. They seemed concerned but not particularly urgent. They told me to document the incidents, to keep track of any future calls or sightings, and to report anything that seemed out of place. That wasn't enough. I felt more vulnerable than ever. I immediately installed a dashcam in my car, hoping it would offer some protection if anything happened. I even set up security cameras around my apartment, but the paranoia lingered. I couldn't escape the sense of being watched, of someone lurking just beyond my reach, knowing everything about me. The following weeks were a blur. I went about my life, but nothing felt the same. The phone calls kept coming, each one stranger and more cryptic than the last. The man would comment on random things about my day, details that didn't make sense unless he was watching me. I started to wonder if he had been following me for months, waiting for the right moment. But then, one night, everything changed. I was working a late shift when I got another ride request. It came through at nearly 2 a.m., a usual time for me, but something about the location made my heart sink. It was a convenience store just a couple of blocks from where I'd first encountered the man who'd been haunting me. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the accept button. I'd driven to that store many times, but after everything that had happened, I didn't want to go near it. It was like tempting fate. But the request was from a different passenger. I shook my head, trying to push my anxiety away, and accepted the ride. It was only a short trip. Maybe this would finally be over, I thought, but the feeling in my gut told me it wasn't. When I pulled into the parking lot, there was the man. I didn't know how he had gotten there so quickly, but there he was, standing near the entrance, watching me. I could feel my blood run cold. This time, I wasn't going to let him get in my car. I quickly canceled the ride and started driving off, my hands shaking on the wheel. But before I could get far, I saw the headlights of a car following me. My stomach dropped, and I realized with a sickening certainty that it was him. I was being followed. Every turn I made, the car stayed behind me. Every time I sped up, the car did the same. It wasn't a random coincidence. It was him. I couldn't handle the fear anymore. My hands were sweating, and my heart raced as I sped through the streets, hoping to lose him. I tried calling the police, but I was too frantic to think clearly. I didn't know what to do. Then, as I took another turn, I saw something that made me slam on the brakes. There, ahead of me, was the convenience store. The same store where I had picked him up the first time. And standing in the doorway, watching me, was the man again. But this time, he wasn't alone. There were two others with him, both wearing dark clothing and standing just behind him, their eyes locked on my car. I knew then, with every ounce of my being, that I was in danger. The figure in the doorway wasn't just standing there, it was like he was daring me to make a move. His posture was rigid, tense, as if he knew exactly what was going through my mind. And his eyes, those dark, calculating eyes, were locked on mine, sending a wave of terror through my entire body. Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the accelerator. The tires screeched as I tore down the street, desperate to put some distance between me and those men. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw the headlights follow me, getting closer with every passing second. My heart pounded harder, the pressure in my chest building. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every turn I took seemed to bring me back to that same street. It was like they were anticipating my every move, cornering me, making sure I couldn't escape. I tried speeding through residential areas, weaving through alleys, but no matter where I went, they were right behind me, inching closer, their headlights blinding in the mirror. The panic was suffocating. I could hear the engine of the car behind me grow louder and louder as it closed the gap. I was running out of options. I wasn't sure what their intentions were, but I knew that if I didn't get help soon, I wouldn't make it out of this alive. Just then, I heard a crackling noise on the radio, a voice, faint at first but slowly becoming clearer. It was a dispatcher's voice, cutting through the static. "Do you need assistance, sir? You are entering a restricted area." I didn't even register what she was saying at first, I was too focused on getting away. But then it hit me, restricted area? What did she mean? I slammed my hand against the button to answer the call. "Yes. I need help. I'm being followed," I yelled, trying to steady my voice. The dispatcher's voice came through again, more urgent this time. "Do not stop. Keep driving until we can locate you. The area you are heading into is dangerous." I didn't have time to ask questions. I just floored it, my foot pressing harder against the gas pedal, my heart racing. I could hear the sound of the other car's engine growing louder still, but my focus was on the road ahead, the dispatcher's words echoing in my mind. Minutes later, I entered a dense wooded area. The streets were narrow, and the trees on either side blocked out most of the light. The only thing illuminating my path was the faint glow of my headlights and the rapidly approaching vehicle behind me. I took another sharp turn, hoping to throw them off. But when I glanced at the rearview mirror, my stomach sank. The headlights weren't there anymore. They were gone. I immediately slammed on the brakes, the car coming to a screeching halt. I sat there, my hands trembling on the wheel, eyes frantically scanning the dark road behind me. I should have been relieved. But the moment I stopped, a sick feeling of dread washed over me. I looked to the side, where the trees were dense, their shadows casting long fingers across the road. That's when I saw him. He was standing just outside the tree line, barely visible, but I could see his figure in the glow of my headlights. The man. The same one from the convenience store. He stood there, still as a statue, watching me. I couldn't move. It felt like time had stopped, and all I could do was stare at him. My breathing quickened. Why had he stopped chasing me? Was this some sort of game? Or worse, was he waiting for me to make a mistake? Suddenly, a loud banging noise came from my trunk, startling me. I jerked around to look, but all I could hear was the heavy pounding in my chest. I thought I'd imagined it. But no, there it was again. A thudding sound, as if something or someone was in my trunk. The panic rose up in me again, surging like a wave. The doors were locked. The windows were up. I was as safe as I could be, but somehow, I knew that wasn't enough. I turned the ignition back on, my hands shaking as I reached for the gear shift. Before I could move, the man's voice suddenly came through the stillness, his voice low and menacing. "Keep running," he said softly, almost calmly, "but know that you won't get far." I didn't need to hear more. I floored the accelerator again, tearing through the woods, not caring about the twists and turns anymore. It was just me and the road. But before I could drive out of the wooded area, I saw flashing lights, police sirens cutting through the darkness. I pulled over instantly, almost crashing into the patrol car as I did. Two officers rushed out, their flashlights cutting through the night. One of them motioned for me to get out of the car, his voice commanding yet strangely calm. "Are you all right?" the officer asked, his eyes scanning the woods. I think I'm being followed," I stuttered, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "There's a man, and he's been stalking me. He was at the convenience store. The officer held up his hand, signaling for silence. Then, his radio crackled. "Unit 44, we have a report of a vehicle matching the description. The vehicle was last seen near the old mill." The officer's eyes narrowed, and he glanced at his partner. The partner gave a slow nod, and without another word, they began scanning the woods. The last thing I saw before they moved off into the dark was the man. He was standing in the same spot, watching me from the tree line. But this time, his eyes were not empty. They were filled with something dark, something I couldn't quite place. I thought I was finally safe, but that wasn't the case. It didn't take long for the officers to return with an update. They reported finding nothing in the woods, no sign of the man, no vehicle matching the description I'd given. My mind was racing. What was going on? Why hadn't they found him? I was so overwhelmed with confusion and fear that I barely noticed the officer handing me a small piece of paper. "We found something," he said simply. My heart stopped when I read it. The paper had a name on it, Carter Mitchell, and an address. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The officer's expression was grave. "He's been reported as a missing person. He's been connected to several unsolved disappearances in this area." I felt my blood run cold. I never thought I'd hear from him again, but as I pulled away from the scene, the phone rang. The number was unknown. Before I could answer, I heard his voice again. It was cold, almost mocking. "You can run, but you can't hide. Not from me. Not ever." The call ended abruptly, and I knew right then, the nightmare wasn't over.